Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of JavaScript Jabber. This week on our panel we have Steve Edwards.
Yo, coming at you live from Portland. I'm filling in for AJ since he's not here right now.
Right. We also have Dan Shapir.
Hey, sitting in the air-conditioned room in hot and sunny Tel Aviv.
I'm Charles Max Wood from Top End Devs, and we have a special guest this week, and that's Yoav Weiss. Do you want to introduce yourself? Let people know it. We've had you on before, so I think some people know who you are, and then there may be a few.
They
people
don't. They should.
Yeah.
Sure. I can introduce myself. So hey, I'm Yoav. I've been working on web performance for way too long, trying to solve it, and so far not being super successful. I've been working on browsers since 2012, and initially on my own, then at Akamai, working on both browsers and server features, then at Google for a few years, and nowadays I'm at Shopify, still working on the web platform. Amongst other things, I co-chair the Web Performance Working Group, and I'm one of the Blink API owners, which is basically the folks that sign off on features getting released in Chromium.
The working group it's worth mentioning is part of the W3C.
Yes, yeah, the W3C Web Performance Working Group. Yeah.
I would like to point out that it's from a visual standpoint, it's easy to tell how smart he is by his haircut. Just saying. So,
yeah, he's one of these guys that shaves his head even though he has hair.
I can see it.
Yeah, I wouldn't define it as has hair, but yeah.
Well, God made only so many perfect heads, and the rest he covered with hair. So
That's right.
Like to say that I'm also I'm an invited expert on that same working group. The guy who invited me over is Yoav, so I'm very thankful for that.
I'm thankful for your contribution. So
fighting the good fight, trying to make the web faster for everybody's sake.
So Yoav, we got this document from you about JavaScript loading, and it's interesting because it starts off with you changed jobs. So you want to kind of give us some context on that, and then we can jump in and talk about JavaScript loading?
Yeah, sure. So basically like I said, worked on Chrome at Google for 5 years, up until a few months back. And earlier this year, I changed employers, but the good thing about open source is that I get to do a lot of the same things with a different head on. Basically, I've been working on making the web faster by default. I've been doing that before joining Google, and I get to do that afterwards. So I continue to work on Chromium. I now also get to work on WebKit, which is a refreshing change. And the only thing with, with the change from working for a browser vendor to working more like closer to the industry, it kind of helps to keep me aligned with what developers actually need. Because working for a browser vendor is great, but it makes it hard to keep up with what actual developers are doing, because browser developers are not web developers, at least not really. And working as part of the quote unquote industry makes it easier to make sure that my work is actually aligned with what people need. So that part is something I'm very, very happy about. Yeah. Other than that, there aren't a lot of commerce voices amongst people who work on browsers. So I'm very happy to bring in that perspective. to those discussions.
That's especially interesting given that probably the organizations or the web, that's websites, web apps that have potentially the greatest need for web performance or see the greatest impact from improving web performance are commerce related websites in many cases.
Yeah.
Like there's always those research papers showing like Amazon increased their revenue by $1 trillion because they sped up loading time by 5 milliseconds or something along these lines.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know about these exact numbers, but yeah, basically performance is very important. There are a lot of public case studies about the relationship between web performance and conversion rates. And I'm biased, but it seems to me that it's like crucial to have that kind of influence on web standards and where the web platform is going.
Yeah, by the way, the Google-driven website, web.dev, which is an excellent website, has a case study section, which actually has real numbers, not numbers invented by me, that describe how companies did, in fact, significantly increase their conversion, their income, their whatever, thanks to improving performance. And like you said, it's not really surprising. We're in an age of little patience and a lot of distractions, and if your website takes too long to load, then people will go elsewhere.
Yeah, if you remove friction, good things happen. That's a general.
Yeah. It reminds me of when I told someone that the pipeline or the funnel at the previous company that I worked at is implemented in Angular. The response was, don't let Angular get between your customers and potential customers and the payment. Something along these lines. But yeah, it is important to reduce friction as much as possible, and improving performance is certainly a good way to do that.
So we're talking about JavaScript loading today. So how does that get into this friction or frictionless performance setup?
So I've been unhappy with the way that JavaScript is being loaded on the web for a long while, but haven't been able to move that too much just yet. But it's essentially, I think that in many ways, when we're looking at web performance and loading performance, there isn't really a good way to load JavaScript. And the main advice that web performance folks can tell people or have been telling people is just to load less JavaScript, which is correct, but not necessarily useful in today's web development environment. If you can load your site with less JavaScript, you should. But at the same time, there are a lot of JavaScript-based apps, but like even for those, loading performance matters. Loading performance matters because your users interact with your website. They will right-click and open a new tab. They will reload. Your browser will unload your app in the background in order to save memory. And in those cases, you're effectively hitting reload, even if your site is there all day. There are a lot of interactions where loading performance matters. So essentially, there are no good ways today to load scripts. And yeah, Dan and I, as part of, we started enumerating the different number of ways of that you can load scripts. But it's essentially, if you go back to the basics, we have blocking scripts that are they are not a good pattern because they are blocking the parser from processing the rest of the document. There are async scripts who are not necessarily a good pattern because they are racy and will potentially get in the way of more important things if they happen to load earlier. And we have deferred scripts who are it's a relatively well-defined model, and it doesn't block the parser, but at the same time they are often they're always loading at a single milestone, a single point in time in the page lifecycle, and that may or may not be sufficient. So
I think, though, it is important to mention that even though, so talking about blocking scripts, which are the most obvious way, and kind of the oldest way, I guess, because really, if you don't say anything else, then a script is blocking by default. Like this is the way the web was originally built. It's problematic, like you said. It's usually bad, but it's needed because sometimes you need to do some things before rendering can proceed. So it's when we say blocking, what it really means is render blocking. It means that when the browser hits that point, that script tag, it has to stop rendering until that script finishes. I know that some browsers do hacks around that, but really at the logical level, that's what it means, right?
Yeah, but there is a better alternative to that, which is blocking equals render, which gives you essentially it gives your async script or deferred script the ability to block rendering, but not block the parser. So the browser can continue to do work, but the user doesn't see things flashing around before that script.
Oh yeah, I forgot that one, and maybe I should have even added that to the list.
Yeah.
In this context, it's the web is something of like an archaeological site, and it's layers upon layers of history, and the thing about the web is that once something has been implemented, it can almost never be taken away and must be supported forever and ever. So in the very olden days, I think it was Brendan Eich that introduced the concept of document write, which enabled JavaScript to kind of inject content into the HTML stream, into the document downloading stream. And therefore, because of that, scripts had to be blocking because you couldn't proceed with processing the HTML just in case something happened to be injected into it. Now, nobody uses document, well, I can't say nobody, but hardly anybody uses document write anymore. It's like a fraction of a percent of websites, I would say. But it still needs to be there. You're smiling, Yoav, so I'm guessing more websites use it than I would like to admit.
Maybe I'm sure there are stats, and we can. Let me see if
probably I can like SSL VPNs or something use it for evil nefarious things, or maybe all sorts of firewalls or whatnot use it for crazy stuff. But it's not something that, let's put it differently, 99.99% of web developers don't use it. But it still needs to be supported, so it's still there. So scripts are not just render blocking, they're download and parsing blocking, as it were. And like you have said, if you put loading equals render, then you're basically telling the browser, look, you need to pause the rendering because maybe I'm doing logic around dark mode and I don't want content flashing or something, so you need to pause the rendering, but I'm not using document write, I promise, so you can actually continue parsing stuff because I won't be modifying the download, the document stream. So yeah, I to be honest, like I said, I actually forgot about that option. Another, by the way, interesting option is, again, if you have a blocking script, whether it's in the head or at the bottom of the body, that also kind of modifies the behavior, as I recall. Like
It
browsers are
modifies
smart
the
about that.
priority. It modifies the priority. It's not like the script will block parsing whenever it's discovered. But if it's discovered at the bottom of the document, that like parser blocking doesn't have a huge effect because there's nothing more than that actual script to parse. So it's blocking nothing behind it. So if you're looking,
some browsers, yeah, we talked about it with Robin Marks. Some browsers in that scenario would actually reduce the priority of the script download. Some don't, by the way.
Yes.
So,
the whole so there are generally for blocking scripts, browsers, all browsers nowadays have a mechanism, or all commercial browsers, like if I'm not sure about, for example, Ladybird, but all big browsers have a mechanism where they continue to parse the document in order to speculatively fetch resources when they encounter a blocking script. And yes, whenever like a blocking script at the head would have a higher priority in some browsers than a blocking script at the bottom. But all the priorities, as well as this speculative preloading of assets, of resources, none of that is specified. So every browser can pretty much do their thing, and web developers shouldn't really rely on it. Yeah, so basically we have multiple ways to load scripts. I am unhappy with all of them. And then we have essentially, for like the future of script loading for the last, I don't know how many years, have been ES modules. And
one more thing before we get to ES modules.
Sure.
I think that another key aspect that confuses people when they think about script loading, but really any asset loading in the browser, is that the difference between important and urgent isn't always obvious. That some stuff is important because the page can't work without it, but it might not be urgent, as in that certain things need to be downloaded sooner. So, for example, in this day and age of SSR and SSG, where we present stuff visually before it actually becomes interactive, like there's a difference in time between when a page is seen and when a page becomes interactive. You might say that visibility is more urgent than interactivity, as long as the difference between the two is sufficiently small.
Like, I'm not sure
I know it's a painful thing, because sufficiently small is a problematic definition in and of itself. And if it's even slightly too big, it becomes a real problem. Like the page literally doesn't properly respond to user interactions, which is worse than slow. It's literally broken. But yeah, I still think that this distinction between what is urgent and what is important, like what is important is stuff that the page can't properly work without. If a certain image, for example, is not downloaded, that's not necessarily important if it's doesn't get in the way of the page's operation. So you get a broken icon, you could still work. On the other hand, let's say if the CSS doesn't download, then there's a good chance that the page becomes totally illegible. So that's kind of really important. And it's also urgent because you need that CSS really quickly. And JavaScript can be somewhere in the middle between these two.
Yeah. I guess fonts also is, one of those assets, which is like, there's no good way to load them because they are potentially important for branding and user experience and whatnot. But if they don't download and you fall to system fonts, that's also like, it's still a usable site. So there's also, so it's an interesting distinction between important and urgent. I think that there's also no current way, like another interesting distinction that there's no way to express today is the difference between when you want the script to load and when you want the script to execute. And at least for async scripts, those two happen at the same time. As soon as the script is loaded and the main thread is clear, that script gets executed. And that may or may not be the right choice depending on when you need that script. So there are scripts that you want them to like load earlier, but still want to be able to control their execution either manually, and then you can use preload for that, but that is hacky and cumbersome. Or otherwise, the only currently official milestone you have in the page lifecycle is the DOM content loaded. When the whole HTML finished parsing, that's when deferred scripts trigger. And yeah, there's no way today to express different preferences there.
And again, there is even a middle step in between the two that's kind of less important but still exists, that people might want to be aware of, which is the parsing. So you're really downloading the script, you're parsing the script, and then you're executing the parsed script. Now, per my recollection, some browsers, not all browsers, can parse the script as it downloads. Some of them can even do it off of the main thread. Some don't. Some bundlers get in the way of this by putting all the script inside strings and then converting those strings into scripts, which I never really understood why bundlers do that, but some of them do.
I did not know that. That's interesting, and that seems, yeah.
I think Webpack does that in certain situations, at least.
I wonder if it's dev mode.
I don't think so. I think that if you, I don't think it's dev mode necessarily.
Okay.
That's interesting, and that can get in the way of, of parse, like a parallel parsing in the background. It can also maybe get in the way of code caching, although I guess if those strings don't change, then eventually, I'm not sure, but it seems less than ideal.
So you were saying that we can separate, so the downloading and parsing can happen together, not even, so we can actually download without parsing by prefetching. We can download and parse together but not execute by preloading, or we can just load the script which does all three, or maybe avoid some of them if you've already prefetched or preloaded.
Yes, but the problem with the script loading, like if the most straightforward mechanism for just loading the script doesn't give you any control regarding to when that script is executed, at least when you're going with async scripts. And like with deferred as well, it gives you a certain point in time in which your script will execute. And
so talking about async scripts for a second. So async scripts become async either because you explicitly put the sync attribute on the script tag, or if you've added them dynamically into the HTML, then they are async by default, as I recall.
Yeah.
Or if they are modules by default async or deferred. I always forget. Deferred.
Modules are deferred by default.
Okay, so those are the two scenarios in which it's async. Async, as its name implies, downloads without blocking. It downloads in the background. But the problem with it, as you said, is that it's executed as soon as it's finished downloading and the browser can execute it, it will execute it.
Yes,
Which means
and
that there's no guarantee about order of things and what else the browser may or may not have done.
yeah, and beyond the lack of guarantees regarding ordering, I've seen a lot of cases in the past where, people have some scripts are critical for rendering. They render the main content, and other scripts aren't. People load all of them with async scripts, and then if you naively preload those scripts, basically, if you make async scripts go faster, some pages will get slower, some pages will get faster, and some will see a mix of essentially both, where some parts of the critical experience get faster, but then there are other scripts that should have run later that get in the way, because execution times essentially grabs a hold of the main thread for things that aren't critical.
Yeah. So again, you're saying something is not urgent. I'll make it async, but what you're not taking into account is that the browser will start downloading it immediately, even if it's a lower priority. And if it happens to be a relatively quick download, then it might get executed faster than you expect, ahead of more urgent stuff. And if its execution is lengthy for any reason whatsoever, because it loops up to 1 trillion or whatever, then you're basically stuck. So you either need to write, if it's your own script, you need to write it in a way that ensures that it doesn't execute really too soon, or alternatively, you might want to load it at a later time, not just using async.
Yeah, and in the past, I've seen optimizations that preloaded things and made everything slower because those async scripts ran too early.
And again, we kind of spoke about it with Robin as well. The reason that people preload scripts, you might ask, if I'm loading scripts up front, why would I preload the scripts? Seems like a useless operation. But the thing is that preloading actually impacted the download priority, or could impact the download priority, which could make the scripts, and I'm making air quotes, download faster. These days, you've got more, let's call it a natural way of doing it, which is the fetch priority attribute.
Yeah, but you also have, there are systems out there who detect scripts as get, for example, script URLs from RUM data, and then automatically preload those in order to Excel. Let's get all the scripts that loaded before FCP or LCP, preload them, and then make things faster. And some of those scripts are in HTML and could have just had the fetch priority, but some of them are late discovered and are dynamically injected through other scripts. And that part is not it's less trivial. In those cases, preload helps more. Also, we used to have a thing called server push, which even loaded these scripts even earlier. And those kind of optimizations often ended up with basically
mixed results.
Yeah, bimodal results. Some pages get way faster, some pages get way slower. And
some pages get faster in some scenarios and slower in other scenarios.
Yeah.
Depending on network conditions and stuff like that. Yeah.
So what do we do then?
It's a tough world.
Because it sounds like you're kind of outlining what the issues could be, but then, what do I, as the regular old web developer, do to make this better?
So right now, I don't really have, I don't have a perfect answer. I can I think as a web developer, you should probably prefer deferred scripts over
Yeah,
async.
defer is the good baseline. Always start with defer when you can.
Yeah, with the caveat that deferred scripts all run in a like all of your pages deferred scripts run in a single task and they don't get interrupted. So that could be a source of responsiveness issues because there
Is
can
that
be.
clear? I think you need to explain what that means.
Okay, sure. Let's say I have a page with 10 different deferred scripts from different sources. All of these scripts will run one after the other without the ability for browsers to interject and handle events while all those scripts are running. At least that's the current Chromium implementation. And I believe other browsers follow the same pattern. It's not really defined in, like, the spec doesn't force that kind of behavior as far as I know. But at the same time, it will be somewhat risky to change it because pages can break if side effects can now be interleaved in between in between deferred scripts. So basically what that means is that, yeah, we can't handle any events between those different scripts. We can't handle any microtasks, any promise resolutions. And that is
going back to your example. If we've got 10 scripts and each one of them runs for 100 milliseconds, then effectively your browser is stuck for a whole second and won't respond to any user interactions during that 1 second, which might be less than ideal.
Yeah. So I would, like, my baseline recommendation would be deferred scripts, but there's this caveat to take into account. If your scripts are, if you expect those scripts to run for a long while, then maybe deferred scripts is not the best option. There's current effort to modify this behavior, but it's not trivial because there is risk, compatibility risk in changing it. Essentially, yeah, I think that today's best option is maybe somewhere in between async and defer, but both of them have drawbacks.
I think that most bundlers or most meta frameworks either use defer with all the downsides because, like we said, it's the best of the worst. Or alternatively, they use blocking scripts at the very end of the document. I think those are the most common ways that most frameworks use, because it's also the safest approach in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I guess.
And as we said, there are two ways to get deferred behavior. Either you add the defer attribute, or you put the type equals module, which makes your script an ESM module, and then it's deferred by default.
Yeah. Which kind of brings me to the problems with ES modules, because they are also not they are how a lot of people, at least a lot of people around me, are writing code. They are not necessarily how a lot of people are delivering code. Bundlers, a lot of bundlers are turning ESM into COM.js or other classic script patterns. And the reason for that is that if you deliver ES modules to the browser and rely on that modularity, essentially have static imports as part of what you deliver, those static imports are by definition discovered late. The browser needs to parse that first script in order to discover the second layer of imports. It downloads them, it parses them, and only then it discovers the third layer of imports, and so on and so forth. So by definition, you're hitting a waterfall pattern if you are delivering ES modules as is to the browser.
And those static imports, if I recall correctly, are blocking, right?
They are blocking the script from running. Yes, they all and yeah, essentially the whole module tree will wait until everything is loaded, and only then will it execute in a single task, similar to how the fur, like it. Basically, you wouldn't have a way to interrupt. The browser won't have a way to interrupt this single task of the script while it's running. So the entire tree will load at once.
But if you, I don't know if you remember, but is the browser itself responsive during that import, or is it kind of like an alert or something?
So the renderer will not be. So while everything is downloaded, the main thread is still free. It's just when the module tree starts executing, that's when the main thread blocks.
So execution is blocked, but not the browser until those imports finish.
Yeah. The download of the imports is done asynchronously.
Okay.
But cool. It's late. Like there is a discoverability problem.
Yeah,
the browser doesn't know about them until it parses. Like doesn't know about the next layer until it parses the layer above it.
Okay, but there is a solution for that, kind of, isn't there, with module preloads or stuff like that?
Sure, but you would need to module preload the entire tree, in order to solve this discoverability, you would need to module preload the entire tree. And one more thing that I was surprised with when poking at ES modules from like slightly closer, import maps are, which are, maybe I should first start by talking about import maps. Essentially, import maps enable us to map module specifiers to URLs. And that has a very strong attribute of enabling us to avoid invalidating entire trees if a single module has changed. So if we have a module that is changed, typically when bundling modules, we are maintaining a hash or a version of that module in the URL itself. And those hash invalidations, because essentially if one of the leaf modules have changed, that its URL has changed as well. That means that the module that refers to it also has a content change that changes its hash, which then propagates up all the way up the module tree.
Oh, so it kind of bubbles up the module tree if any leaf kind of changed.
Exactly.
Incidentally, I'm just going to point out that import maps is what Rails uses now as its default.
Yeah, the whole it's kind of the whole DHH thing, I think, is avoiding bundlers and relying on the built-in browser capabilities, which means ES modules, the built-in ES modules and import maps.
Yep.
Yeah, so import maps are great for that purpose, but they are also, at least today, are rather fragile. And there can only be a single import map in a document, and it has to be the first thing that loads inside of that document. So if you have any module script that loads before an import map, the import map throws and nothing of what it does is valid. And if you have a very large JavaScript app that has, let's say, a few thousand modules, which I've now heard multiple real-life examples of in multiple companies, you would have to load all of these thousands of modules into your, like the mapping for all of those modules will have to be part of your initial import map, which is the very first thing that your HTML should contain. Inline. So there are
inline. It has to be inline.
Yes, there are no support for external import maps. And external
Getting better and better.
Yeah,
I guess I see the reason. I mean, given that it's so urgent and so fragile, you don't want it as a separate document that you need to go and download on the side. But still, it's not wonderful to have this huge thing stuck at the very beginning of your lovely semantic document.
Yeah, so I tend to agree. I think that we, like, basically what I've spent a large chunk of my day-to-day on is trying to figure out what a spec for having the ability to have multiple import maps and then merge them. What would that look like? And yeah,
interesting.
So I'm basically, I think this is one of the more urgent problems for both very large JavaScript apps, but also for smaller ones that don't necessarily have control over their entire content. I don't know if you, like, Dan, if you imagine your days at Wix, like, there are a lot of CMSs that integrate content from multiple places. Some content is, coming from the platform. Some content is coming from your customers and their third parties, and you integrate all that together. And if any one of those folks is using an import map and another was using modules before it, everything breaks.
Yeah, I'm also thinking of stuff like Google Tag Manager or any other kind of pixel system, which could theoretically or ideally benefit from such a mechanism. But again, you're bringing in resources from multiple vendors, from multiple URLs. It's having a single source of truth and everything else ignored is a very problematic model.
I agree, and I think like the dynamic script loading from third parties, I think that's a very interesting use case here as well. And that's so basically, I think that right now there are a bunch of issues with ES modules and import maps, and I'm on my starting my path to fixing them.
And it can get even more complicated if you throw web workers into the mix, I would imagine.
To be honest, I haven't even thought a whole lot about web workers in this context. I mean, there are, because right now they don't have a way to, like, web workers don't have import maps.
And they need it because you can actually, okay, so first of all, we talked about the various ways to load scripts. So web workers are another way to load scripts, because if you do a new worker, the parameter you specify is the script file that gets loaded into that web worker. So effectively, here's another way to load scripts. Not only that, there's a parameter that controls whether or not the script that you load into the web workers is ESM or not. It's ESM or classic, I think, and the default is classic, but it might be ESM. So you might be loading an ESM script into the web worker, And then you definitely would need some sort of a mapping mechanism to work with the worker.
Yeah.
Pun intended or pun not intended.
I agree. And right now, import maps are only defined for documents and only defined
Would
as
they
inline.
kind of,
For worker, you don't really have where to inline that import map today.
so would it use again, I don't know if you remember, but would it use the documents, the parent document? So it just doesn't have a map at all, and that's it. I can kind of get it, because it might be a shared worker, and then or a service worker, and then where would it take the map from? But a web worker, I don't know, maybe.
To be like, I think it's a very valid case. And yes, module workers are the future, especially because import scripts for classic workers is also very
bad.
has its share of
bad.
problems. It's
bad.
It is bad.
Let's put it this way. I made Wix loaded scripts and web workers scripts significantly faster by hacking around import scripts, which is yet another way of loading scripts into the browser. And I won't even go there.
Because it's loading them, like if you have a list of scripts, they will load sequentially.
Synchronously and sequentially.
Synchronously and sequentially, and yes. And that is like without any good reason.
It sounds like you're working on a new standard to handle some of this. So what does that look like, and what are kind of the hang-ups getting there?
So basically I'm planning to work on a bunch of standard improvements or web platform improvements on that front. So the very first thing that already shipped that was missing from my perspective for ES modules is integrity, sub-resource integrity, so SRI. If you're familiar with that for classic scripts, you have an integrity attribute where you can say, only execute this script if it matches this hash. So if as part of my build process, I have controls over my build process, then I upload these assets somewhere. And then when the site loads, I want to make sure that my assets match what I think they should be. And no malicious actor has switched them up in between.
Like avoiding a man in the middle kind of attack.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really man in the middle. It's more of a, I don't know if there's a fancy name for it, but basically the content swap at rest. So the content is uploaded to your hosting provider, and then someone with the keys can swap it to add malicious payload. You want to avoid that scenario. You want to have integrity checks in place in the browser.
So you can actually put an attribute on the script tag that says, this is the checksum that my script should have. And if it doesn't, then just, ditch it.
Yes. Same for CSS and preloads. And that's it. You can't do that for any other type of content, but that is sufficient because images are presumably not very important. And at the same time, they're also harder to pull, harder to do that integrity check without slowing them down. But this piece was missing from module imports. So if you have dynamic imports for modules where you want to load the critical scripts up front and then dynamically load stuff you need for later once things calm down or once the user did something, those scripts didn't have any way to get an integrity check without jumping through many hoops. Because it didn't have, like, there was no native support for ES modules and integrity checks. So the first step I took in that potentially long path to making script loading better is to add that kind of support with an integrity section as part of the import map. So that has landed in Chrome 127 last week, hitting stable last week, and it's on its way to Safari 18, which is presumably gonna hit users sometimes this fall. So
cool.
It was a relatively fast project. Basically, I, during a flight, put together initial prototype, initial spec, and rudimentary tests, and then like the whole thing took roughly 2 weeks to.
You built Chrome while on a flight?
Yes. This is what I do on flights.
Interesting.
Yeah.
To each their own, I guess.
So you've got the integrity check.
So
are there other?
Yeah, that was the first step. I think that the next step is probably the multiple import maps and dynamic import maps.
Okay.
I think that's the next thing to reduce fragility and generally, make it more feasible for large apps to use import maps, because the cache cascade problems that they solve are real, but the blocking nature is blocking.
Yeah, but that opens interesting questions, like, unless I'm overthinking it, maybe, which is possible. I do that. But for example, it means that script A can control where unrelated script B loads from. Like, I'm kind of, it's kind of like what I would do with a service worker in a sense. Like, I can tell it says this URL, but actually download it from that URL.
So
with dynamic import maps.
So with dynamic import maps, essentially you would have you wouldn't have the ability to redefine a script that was already loaded.
No, obviously it's already loaded.
A script that was already defined in another import map. So you wouldn't be able to redefine a specifier.
So it's not like cascading, it's kind of like a join sort of a thing.
A join where first in stays kind of.
Yeah, no overwriting.
Yeah. And that is still up for grabs. Like, I have an algorithm in mind. I will, like, once I have a PR up, I will definitely share it with the world as well as with you. And I'm happy to get feedback on that. But I think it's I think that the model where you can't you can't override something that was already defined gives us enough safety for some definition of safety. I mean, theoretically, import maps are essentially scripts that are running in the top level documents context. So they can, the fact that they can override things is not a security risk, because you already, you introduced the vampire into your home kind of scenario. But at the same time, we don't want developers to be surprised, and we don't want import maps that are coming from different sources to collide. So we want this to be as predictable as possible.
There's a question on Twitter from Gal Weissman. I'm sorry if I say your name wrong, my friend.
Oh, we only had him as
but
a guest, I think.
yeah. But he asks about a compromised script can potentially leverage an iframe to bypass the SRI checks dictated by the top document and thus load a remote third-party script that's not allowed to load. I think the I think is in parentheses. Is that being taken into consideration? So this is back on the SRI.
Knowing Gal, I'm sure he has a scenario in mind that I don't. But I think that non-verifiable, like an iframe, we're talking like does he mention like same origin, cross origin?
No, it would have to be same origin, otherwise it's
because otherwise it's irrelevant. Yeah, a same origin iframe, if it's compromised, then it would have a different it would have a different integrity. Like the import map doesn't apply to same origin iframes, so it would be able to load that script. At the same time, I wouldn't expect the cache to, like, if that script is cached from the same origin iframe, I wouldn't expect it to be loaded at the top level without failing, because one has integrity checks and one doesn't. So I would expect the browser to fail that load at the top level frame.
I also actually have a question. Like, looking at all the stuff that you're doing, so the SRI, the module maps, also the work on compression dictionaries. I think we had Patrick Meenan on the show to talk about it. All this stuff is about how to better load JavaScript into the browser so that we don't need bundlers as much, or that bundlers can be maybe less heavy-handed than they are. You're shaking your head.
That's not so. I think we need bundlers. I think that there are some issues with like physics when it comes to loading a lot of small modules into the browser. Browsers have overhead, like per request overhead. That overhead is unlikely to go
lookup.
away. Just
cookie lookup.
Yeah.
Inter-process communication.
Yes.
Networking stack.
Cache validations, all that. Like that takes time, and I think at the time we looked at Chrome, and it was around like 1 to 2 milliseconds per resource, which is not awful unless you're loading 5,000 resources. And in that case, you're talking about like 10 seconds just to get the thing. Like even if it's on disk, even if it like 0 RTT on the network, it still takes a long time to load these assets. But that part is unlikely to go away. Go ahead.
In those cases, isn't the problem somewhere else? I mean, if your application's designed in such a way that you don't have any sort of segmentation and you're loading 5,000 assets, I mean, it just kind of seems disproportionate, like, is this really the problem over here?
But AJ, this is kind of the DHH model. I mean, DHH basically said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, like, let's not bundle at all, which means that the structure of your code in your code base is also the structure in which the code loads. Now, if you're one of those people who likes to put every function or every component in their own separate file, then you can end up with, and it's a large enough project, you will end up with thousands of resources.
Well, maybe you shouldn't do that. Maybe that should be a signal. That's a bad way to code. Stop doing it.
So, so if you have a very large team, if you have a very large team that's building a very large web app, let's say, Facebook, they have a lot of people working on different parts of the app. They share code. There are a lot of modules involved.
Well, but that's more for the benefit of investors, like trying to show continual growth by continually hiring more people, not because people are needed. Like Twitter fired 70% of their workforce and Twitter got better.
I would argue that got better part, but yeah,
it didn't get worse. It's not slower. It's not less reliable.
I think though that the point is you've got so let's say that you've got things broken up by components and you've got the components in different files like we're talking about. There are a lot of things that are really convenient as far as like developer ergonomics that come from that, and that's why we do it, right? But at the end of the day, when we deliver it to the browser, the point is that you can pull all of that together with a bundler and deliver one deliverable and reduce a lot of that overhead, which also makes sense. And I'm a big fan of having tools that solve the different problems in the right way. And so that's where I'm sitting here and agreeing with Yoav on this, even though I am, I generally agree in a lot of cases with DHH. In this case, it makes a lot of sense to have that bundler pick up those things and, any of the other tiny bits that kind of have similar responsibilities. And then something like import maps solves some of the other issues where I'm pulling in a bunch of third-party stuff and saying, okay, I need this and I need this and I need this and I need this, but I'm not necessarily fiddling with that stuff.
And I'll also phrase it in a different way. If I'm using a compiled language, like, I don't know, like a C or Rust or whatever, there is a separation between how the code is organized and how the bytes are delivered for execution. Mm-hmm. And the DHH model, for better and worse, cancels this separation. If I prefer using a lot of small files, it's a choice that you might not agree with, but it's a legitimate choice for some organizations. It means that I can't use the DHH model or the DHH approach without paying a potentially hefty price for it.
Fair. I mean, I agree with that. I've seen code bases where it's one function per file. It's almost like a meme. It's so popular, but it's silly. I mean, you can't even understand the context of how a button fits into something because you got to look at 10 files to figure out. I'm thinking, I don't know. I was thinking, why would something have 5,000 files? I wasn't even thinking of the one function per file because I wouldn't think a serious business would do that. I don't know if Facebook does that.
Yeah, I don't think it's a one function per file, but I think it does result code sharing between teams does result in a lot of small modules. They're not necessarily a single function, but they are a single functionality. And I don't know if this is the best way to develop or the worst way to develop. Like I said in the beginning, I'm not really a web developer. I pretend to be one once in a while, but I'm not doing that in my day-to-day. I'm mostly hanging on browsers. But it is a legitimate way to deliver software on the web. And we should and I think that bundlers are essential for that part, both for the browser overhead as well as for compression ratios. Because if you're compressing very small files, you will compress them very poorly compared to large files that compress very well. So,
but then we have the compression dictionaries, which mostly solve that.
I don't think they will solve it for very small. You would still have to deliver the very small files once, and you would still have a very I think compression dictionaries solve a different problem with bundlers, or at least in my view, they could solve it as it in my view, with bundlers, one of the issues with a large bundle, one of the issues is you're losing caching granularity. If any single function, a single character inside that bundle changes, you have to download the whole thing back again. And compression dictionaries will help us avoid that, at least on the network.
Yeah. So, but my initial point was kind of different. We're doing a lot of things that impact the platform in a way that certainly affects how bundlers work or should work. How much cooperation are you guys getting from the bundle makers? Because it seems that they should be significantly involved in all this effort.
So at the time, I think maybe on the podcast, we were talking about like web bundles in a long while ago. And bundlers were very much part of the loop on this. And Daniel Ehrenberg from, I don't like, he may have been at the Galia. He's nowadays at Bloomberg. He was super involved in bringing the bundler community into the room. And there's a TC39 tooling meeting that we talked about multiple times at the time about web bundles. And I think that they were super supportive. I think that once this, what I'm talking about will reach a more mature level, I would be very happy to talk to them. And I'm assuming that they will be similarly supportive, because none of the, essentially, this is all not talking about maybe improving bundlers and improving the output of bundlers to deliver better experiences. So I think it aligns well with everyone's goals and intentions. In the meantime, a lot of the bundlers are very configurable, and you can go a long way just by mucking around with roll-up plugins. And that is at least the approach that I'm taking now with the various prototypes that I'm working on.
Which means that you're effectively compatible with ES build, which means that you're effectively compatible with Vite.
Yeah.
I love Vite.
Same.
So, sorry, just came out. Anyway, because like I said, I follow along with Rails and DHH. I mean, that's kind of where I live my programming life, but I'm using Vite on my Rails projects. I'm not using import maps.
Who isn't?
So, but I kind of want to jump back over. So far we've got compression dictionaries, we've got import maps, doing multiple import maps, we've got SRI. I mean, what other things are you proposing to fix this stuff?
So proposing is a bit of a big word. I have ideas that I want to play around with. One of them is defining different controls as to when the scripts are loaded versus when they're executed, and defining more milestones for the browser to execute deferred semantic scripts other than just the DOM content loaded. So maybe adds more milestones around first render, like FCP fired, now execute these other scripts. Unload fired, execute these other scripts after unload. Things along those lines are things that I'm planning to play around with.
I guess what you mean is declarative support, because programmatic support already exists. For example, obviously for onload, I can do window.onload equals.
Sure.
And I can specify code to execute on the onload.
Yeah, so I would love to play around with a polyfill of what declarative support for that would look like, and see if these kind of modules give us any benefits in terms of execution. And then if they are, then this would be potentially something to propose as new keywords that will enable us to better load scripts without the hacking through, like preloading the assets and then executing the script manually in different milestones. So this is one thing I'm thinking of playing around with. Another is with stream execution of bundles. So we talked about the fact that bundles are, if anything changes inside the bundle, then the entire bundle gets invalidated in the cache and you need to download a new one. But beside that, bundles also delay execution because you have to download the entire bundle before you can start executing anything. But because we are starting off from ES modules, we could maintain those module boundaries and then recreate them in the browser in ways that enable the browser to execute the modules separately. And there's a TC39 proposal around module declarations, again, from Daniel Ehrenberg that I mentioned earlier. I am playing around with the userland prototype to see what that gives. It requires a lot of hacks, both on the bundler side as well as on the browser side. But we'll see where that gets me. I still haven't seen it working yet, but I'm hopeful that this would be a successful module to start executing earlier.
An interesting idea that just occurred to me while we were speaking is you were talking about declaratively controlling when scripts execute.
Yeah.
It might be worthwhile to also have to try out declarative ways of controlling when resources or scripts start downloading. Like, I want to download something asynchronously, but I don't want for it to start downloading before the LCP, because I don't want it to get in the way of the LCP in any shape or form.
Yeah.
But by the way, it's worth mentioning that if people who are listening to us find all this stuff interesting and have their own ideas, they can basically participate in the W3C Web Performance Working Group and make their thoughts heard.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. So some of these things are hacky projects that haven't gotten anywhere just yet. Some are going to probably live mostly as WWG PRs against the HTML spec. But all of this is something that we can and should discuss in the Web Performance Working Group. So yes, if folks are interested, feel free to hit me up. I can join the calls, and make your voices heard.
Yeah, this sounds like a good place to kind of start to wrap up too. Is there a list of these proposals or these ideas somewhere that you have, Yoav, or are we kind of it right now?
I need to write it down. This is all there's a list of things I put together for this podcast, but it's not something I can publish. But yeah, I need to write down this as a master plan to improve script loading, and then I need to publish something on that front.
Cool. Well, if people have ideas, how do they join that working group? I think that might be an interesting place to go.
Basically the main path. So if they work for a W3C member, then they can just join and ask their AC representative to join the working group, and that's it. Otherwise, they can ping me or Nick Jansma, who's the other chair at Akamai, we can talk through the issue with them. I'm pasting a link to the web performance to the working groups page where you can, if you're a WPC member, you can join through there. And otherwise, just email me or Nick Jansma, and we can set you up. We're available over email, there's the web performance Slack group that a lot of people are on, and otherwise, on the internets.
Good deal. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and slide us into our picks. But this has been really fascinating. But yeah, let's do our picks. AJ, do you want to start us off with picks?
Let's see. What have I got? My wife and I recently watched the we've started watching the Jason Bourne trilogy, but we started with the best one, which is Bourne Supremacy. And she liked that, so we're probably going to watch the others as well. So I will pick the Bourne trilogy because it's kind of a cool movie. And
she had the sufficient context.
When the movie started, I told her, okay, the thing is, this guy is basically James Bond, except he wakes up one day with amnesia and is trying to figure out what he's doing. And this is the second movie, and we're starting with this one because it's better. And if we started with the first one and you didn't like it, you might not want to watch the rest of them. But the other, they're all the kind of the same movie. It's kind of like Terminator and Terminator 2. It's the same movie. It's just way better production.
By the way, I'm one of the few people I imagine who've actually read the Ludlum book before they even watched the first movie.
So there's like 10 books, aren't there?
To be honest, I don't remember. The problem with Ludlum is that all his books kind of are the same book.
Well, the movies are the same movie, so that tracks. But I mean, same thing with James Bond, right?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, so there's that. I'm still motorcycling, still absolutely love it. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else worth picking. I do have to rescind a pick from earlier. At one point I'd picked Silicon Power drives. I've loved Silicon Power for micro SD cards. They have been amazing. However, I had ordered about 16 of the Silicon Power SSDs. Actually, I don't think it was that many. It was about that many. 4 of them have failed over the course of the last year and a half. And this is in a server environment. And they told me, I got a business account with them. They told me they would, warranty them for the server. They'll warranty them, but they fail. And we've also got 16 Crucial MX500s, and not a single one of them has had a hiccup. So I guess my pick would be Crucial MX500s. If you're putting together a server and you want the best value drives, I have to switch my pick on that to being Crucial. Silicon Power is like half the price, but you don't want to be going to your data center and replacing drives except for when you have to. So I'll pick those as my picks.
Steve, what are your picks?
Well, before we get to the high point of every episode, came across an interesting blog post or article, whatever you want to call it, on Hacker News about OpenAI. And, we've been using AI more and more in my work, but in a scope limited sort of capacity based on our own data. But the title is How Does OpenAI Survive? And it's a pretty detailed walk through the business model and what OpenAI would need in terms of huge growth of money and just a bunch of unprecedented things to happen in order for them to survive over the next couple of years. So If you want something as a cure for insomnia, it's pretty good, I think, but it's also pretty interesting if you're into reading about OpenAI. Says they seem to be on a lot of tips of everybody's tongues these days.
We kind of spoke about this subject when Steve Sewell was on the show. I think I kind of half tongue in cheek said that like the only company actually making money off of the AI revolution is NVIDIA.
Right, because of the chips, right?
Yep.
Well, I'm looking forward to when we can just download the model on, when OpenAI goes out of business and they open source the model. I'm happy to download that 40 gigabytes on my computer and run it off the power of my MacBook.
I think there's the Olama model that you can from Facebook, I think, which you can already download.
That's true, and it's better in some ways than ChatGPT 3, but it's not better than ChatGPT 4.0.
Yeah, the way that I understand it, and I'm still learning about this stuff, but yeah, it's good for a baseline if you're going to train your own stuff on top of it, right, to give it better context. But yeah, the GPT-4 models are much more comprehensive and give better answers.
I mean, they do have access to every book that's ever been made in every journal, and because they get asked questions like, so are you using copyrighted content that's like paid content that you're just putting into the model and making available to everyone, and you're going to face major lawsuits? And they're like, it's hard to say because I don't know exactly where all the data comes from, but it's definitely data that's available online. So your Olama is like basically Wikipedia, Stack Overflow. It's the big sites, but GPT 4.0 is all of the content that humanity has ever created. There's not going to be a GPT 5 because there's no more data left.
All right, and then moving on to the highlighted.
Unless they start putting in pictures of cats, because there are always new pictures of cats.
Always.
Some of those are going to be AI generated too.
That's why I'm paying the $20 a month. I gotta get the best cats. The best cats.
The cats with 6 fingers.
So, I am suing the doctor who delivered my baby. My son now has to grow up without a liver. Delivered. Anyway, sorry. Sometimes you got to explain them. I was attacked by a flock of sheep yesterday, but luckily I was only grazed. That one's sort of bad.
We can see that there. We can see that.
Yeah, right there.
Grazed.
And then I love this one. I thought for sure I'd get shot down on this next one, but people loved it. I was gassing up my Honda Accord the other day at a gas station, and a snarky Tesla owner asked me how much I spend on gas. I said, about 5 minutes.
That was well done. And I need to make a remark on Tesla, by the way. They are the number 2 per capita, as in per Tesla owner versus per other car owner. They are number 2 and most likely to get into a wreck, and they are the number 1 motorcyclist killers. So if you own a Tesla, wake up, get your hands on the steering wheel, watch what's in front of you. Don't run over people. Okay, thanks.
By the way, about the delivered, it kind of reminded me there was this scene from Monty Python, the Meaning of Life movie, where they knock on his door and they said, "You're a registered organ donor." It says, "Yes, we've come to collect."
Oh boy, yes, that my favorite scene from that particular movie is the guy in the restaurant.
Oh,
just a waffle or thin mint, sir. That's all.
No, I think my best one, and my favorite one, is that every sperm is sacred song and dance routine.
Anyway, those are my picks.
Dan, why don't you just keep us going? What are your picks?
Not exactly a pick. The 2020s have sucked so far, and this year has not been different in any way, shape, or form. And a week and a half ago, our lovely and beloved, lovely and beloved mother-in-law passed away. So it's been a really tough week for us. So I would like to dedicate my part of this show to her memory. I miss her dearly. We all do. And that's all I have.
Yeah, losing people's hard.
Yep.
All right, I'm going to jump in with some picks. I usually do a board game, and so I'm going to do a board game. We played this yesterday. What we've been doing with my family is we've been picking a game that we haven't played in a while out of our collection, and then, we play it, and we decide if we want to keep it or not. And the one that we picked up was Imagine If. And this is more of a party game, which I have to say generally are not my favorite games. This one's fun. I just sometimes, when I'm in the mood for a board game, I usually want something that's going to make me kind of think and strategize and stuff. The party games aren't that way, but this one's a fun one, especially if you're all part of the same group that know the same set of people. You write down names around the outside of the board. There's a marker. You roll the die. You move it that many spaces. You pull a card. You read the card, and it's imagine if Betty were a type of shoe. Which one would she be, right? And then it's like a stiletto, a hiking boot, a baby booty, right? And so then everybody has cards numbered 1 through 6 in their hand. They put one face down. You flip them over. If you're in the majority, then or if you're in the group that has the most, I guess that doesn't mean you're in the majority. Then you move up 1. If you're the person who read the card, you move up 2, and then you do it again. There's a space for challenge, and that one you pick another person that you think you're going to match with. You roll the die again. You move the marker. You read the card. The two of you put down your numbers, and if your numbers match, you move 4. And if you don't, then you move back 2. And my 8-year-old sabotaged me by challenging me and then picking a number that she knew I wouldn't pick so that I wouldn't win. That's the way that game went last night. But overall, it's a fun game. Board Game Geek weights it at 1.22, which means it's super simple. I basically explained all the rules to you in less than a minute. But it is kind of a fun party game. And so, we had all of our family members and then, Grandpa who wasn't there. So, anyway, I'll go ahead and link to the Board Game Geek listing in the comments only show up on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. So if you're watching on Twitter, which is where most people are watching, you just have to go look it up. It's Imagine If. Drop the E at the end of Imagine, put IFF at the end, you'll find it. And then other picks. So my oldest son is 18, and his favorite movie is A Quiet Place. And so we went and saw A Quiet Place day 1. No spoilers. He said that some of the people that are in A Quiet Place day 1 are in A Quiet Place part 2, which I haven't seen. But they're pretty minor characters. So I guess it's kind of an origin story for that group of people that you'll see in the A Quiet Place part 2. But it was good. It's not the best movie I've ever seen, but it wasn't something I regretted going to see in the theater. So I'm going to pick that. And
wait, there's A Quiet Place day 1, then there's A Quiet Place, and then there's still A Quiet Place.
So A Quiet Place is the first movie they made, and then A Quiet Place Part 2 apparently is the second movie, and then this one's a prequel that they made.
It's like the Star Wars prequels that came after.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like good.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Anyway, so I enjoyed those. So I'm going to pick that, and then.
Okay. Yeah, I was just confused about it. It actually is called Part 2 because I did see those.
Yes.
But I didn't remember what the name of the second one. It literally is called Part 2. Got it.
Yep. So so I'm enjoying those, and then one other TV show. So I'm picking nothing technical, I guess. Is I was browsing through Netflix and I saw that they did a live action Avatar: The Last Airbender, and so I watched a few episodes of that with my 18-year-old son, and we enjoyed those. So I'm going to pick those. And that's it. That's it for my picks. Yoav, do you have some picks for us?
Sure. So the first one, I guess, is hiking, or I don't know if I have more than that, but like basically it took me way too long to realize that I practically live an hour and a half from the Alps and I should go up a mountain every time I get an opportunity to do that. And so it's that like hiking is the best. Almost everyone can do that. And even if you suck at it at first, you get better. And it's great for your health. It's great for your mind. And everyone should hike more.
I can confirm and attest that you do live in a beautiful area, but given that you live in southern France, that's not really surprising.
But at the same time, I think everyone, I don't, not everyone, but if you live next to a mountain of some sort, you should go up it once in a while. That's what I say.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because AJ and I here, we live pretty close to the mountains here too, and boy, there are some amazing hikes to go on. Yeah, definitely if you have the opportunity, get out and see it, or get out and see the world.
And if you have the opportunity to go to Denver, those are the best mountains, even better than Utah mountains.
Denver's way out on the plains. You want to kind of get up toward the mountain, but the mountains around there.
I meant Colorado Springs. I meant to say Colorado. I didn't mean to say Denver. I meant to say Colorado. But we took a weekend trip to the Colorado Springs area to see the Royal Gorge Bridge and the Garden of the Gods.
Garden of the Gods is awesome.
Gods is gorgeous. Yeah,
I went to college just a couple miles from there, so that was a popular place to go hang out, ride bikes out there and stuff.
Yeah. And we went whitewater rafting.
Yeah, I did that Friday too. Good times.
Cool. Yeah,
there's some gorgeous places up by Boulder too.
Yeah, never been to Utah or Colorado, so I should probably do that at some point.
Come on out.
Well, Utah's awesome. My daughter and I did a sort of a loop around Utah 2-3 years ago. We met up with AJ and his family when we were down there, and did the loop, come down through through Moab, Canyonlands, and what's right across from Canyonlands? Can't even remember. And then down through Lake Powell and come up over to Bryce Canyon. Oh, Arches. We had Arches and Canyonlands and Bryce Canyon and Lake Powell, and it's awesome. It's really pretty. Didn't hit Zion. Wish we would have hit Zion, but it's an amazing trip.
The only problem
Zion's kind of on the other side of the state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the only problem is that the U.S. is just so big, so getting from one place to the other requires so much driving.
Isn't it around the same size as Europe, though?
What?
Okay.
Yeah, Utah is the same size as Europe. I don't know. I'm not here.
It's the same size as some of the European countries.
Yeah, I mean it's. I think it's big. It's a lot of driving involved.
I would concur that driving around all of Europe would also require a lot of driving. The thing about Europe is that especially if it's less about the scenery in most cases. It's more about art and architecture and stuff like that. And then things tend to be closer together. Also, there are better railways.
I stand corrected. Yes. The United States is twice the size of Europe.
Oh, wow.
Or the European Union, which is not.
Well, like half of Europe is Russia. So
it's interesting.
Yeah, but when I lived in Italy is basically if you took Arizona or Utah and you stretched it out to the length of California. Right. So anyway, you get different geographic deals when you go to different countries. But yeah, I mean, you can roughly say, land size, some of the Western states are as big as some of the bigger European countries. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thanks for coming, Yoav. This was really fascinating, and hopefully, we get some more ideas coming your way, and we can see some of these things, come to fruition and make the internet better.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Yeah, whatever you can do to actually make the web platform and the web itself better is a literal win for everybody.
All right. Well, until next time, folks, Max out.